Breaking news, World War III update, a massive gas pipeline explosion in Iran. Let's contextualize this for a moment and understand that Iran will retaliate for this. Where and when is anybody's best guess, but we can assume that it's going to be on critical infrastructure. Eye for an eye is about to make the whole world energy blind. You can put that on a t-shirt if you want. This is one of their main gas pipelines, okay? And of course, we have to presume at this stage in the game that this was either a direct kinetic act of sabotage or this was a cyber attack. Typically, Iranian critical infrastructural systems, due to their past experience with things like Stuxnet, are all air-gapped, meaning that they're disconnected from the internet. However, they still have an intranet, and if you can infiltrate that, you can potentially turn up pressure valves, turn down pressure valves, mess with sensors, and you can cause things like this to potentially happen. Now, Iran is going to retaliate for this. Where and when they do it is anybody's best guess. But let's talk about what else happened just before this. The markets were acting very strange today. Of course, the CPI came in hot. Inflation is up once again. Why? Because the price of oil was marginally upwards. Oil and inflation are like this. I'm going to show you guys a graph in the moment. When everybody's always talking about rates and CPI and what's the cause of all this, just look at the price of oil. It's going to tell you every single thing about where the world is going. Every war is about energy, okay? Now, with respect to this, though, something strange happened in the markets today. In fact, oil was incidentally up today, about 1.5%. And usually, when the dollar is up, as it was today, oil correspondingly is down. There's an inverse relationship between oil and gold prices typically and dollars, because that's what they're measured in. So when the dollar goes up, the price of gold tends to go down because that's what it's measured in. Today, however, before this happened, and this happened right around market close, the price of oil was up around 1 to 1.5%. It was playing in that region. In fact, there was a time I think where it was almost up to 2%. That's before you factor in the roughly 1% jump in the US dollar. Maybe it wasn't quite that much, but if you add those things together, you're looking at a major price jump in the price of oil, okay? Now, why? Why is the price of oil going up, and why are the markets crashing? Well, let's think about this for a second. We know that Iran is going to retaliate for this. Is it at all possible or conceivable that somebody knew this was going to happen and that they got a stock tip and they were front running the markets? They knew this was about to happen, so big money made a few moves. Is that a possibility? I would say so. 24 hours before this happened, the Iranians were conducting a military exercise that simulated an attack on an Israeli Palmyra air base. This is the air base which houses most of their F-35s. Now, interestingly, they did not just a typical run-of-the-mill test, but they also were practicing utilizing, and this is the pipeline that runs through the country here, one of their largest pipelines. It's all about energy, folks. Everything is about energy. They also conducted tests. Now take a look at this. What do you notice about this scene? Watch very closely. What do you notice about that? Is that your run-of-the-mill warship? What does that look like to you guys? Let's just watch that again, okay? Pay close attention. What is that missile firing from? And what kind of ship is this? Got to pay close attention. To me, that looks like a shipping container, doesn't it? It looks like a cargo shipping container. Well, this is actually called the Club K container missile system. It's something we've talked about in our series on asymmetrical warfare before. This is the first time I've actually seen it in action. We've seen simulations of it. We've known that it's been tried and tested and existed, or at least I've never actually seen it being demonstrated like this. Now, understand what this means, okay? Number one, they're simulating attacks with these massive bombs on Israeli air bases, and they're also doing it from commercial cargo ships, or they're demonstrating that you could have these in commercial cargo ships. Now think about how many of these systems you could have on one cargo ship that was disguised as a civilian commercial vessel. And that's the problem. This is why this is asymmetrical warfare. This is a non-conventional form of warfare where you could effectively have many of these parked off the coast of Israel or traversing the Mediterranean or traversing the Red Sea, wherever you wanted them, under the guise of a commercial vessel. Now you have to presume that every Iranian vessel is potentially carrying one of these and is potentially a target, okay? Iran was sending a message here, and perhaps someone was sending a message back. The question is, what is Iran going to do next? Are they going to respond in kind? And are they going to start attacking other countries who are loosely affiliated or fully fledged allies of Israel? Are they going to start attacking their critical infrastructural facilities? Now, according to the IAEA, Rafael Grossi made a very interesting statement today that not many people are paying attention to. Basically, he said that he believes that the Iranians are not being entirely upfront about their nuclear program. And he has made reference to the fact that Ali Akbar Salahi, who's an Iranian academic, a diplomat, and a former head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, made a very provocative statement on Iranian state TV just the other day. Basically, he said that we have all of the components to make a nuclear weapon, but we're just choosing not to. They have all the components to make a nuclear weapon, they're just choosing not to. Now, regardless of whether or not they have a nuclear weapon yet, the simple fact that they have weapon systems like this that can target with pinpoint precision, as they've demonstrated recently when they launched that missile from Iran into Syria, the first time that that was done, to the best of my knowledge, at least directly from Iran, 1,200 kilometers with pinpoint precision. This missile fell probably right in the guy's lap who they claim was a Mossad agent. So Iran has this capability, but more importantly is the subterranean component of all this. See, our leaders don't want you to know how impossible it is to fight World War III with conventional weapons. It's virtually impossible. Let's just face it, they're not going to call it World War III until it's over, and there's probably nobody left. We're never going to directly say we're in a world war. This is typically the case when you're in a world war. It's not called a world war until after it concludes and the smoke clears. But understand that World War III is going to be fought in one of four ways. Cyber attack, that's going to be the biggest one. We're going to see biowarfare. Very likely we're going to see biowarfare because you cannot win. I mean, if Russia versus Ukraine has shown us anything, it is just a long, drawn-out war of attrition when it comes to utilizing artillery and even drones. It's going to be electromagnetic pulse weaponry, and of course, last but not least, tactical theater nuclear weapons, and then, heaven forbid, strategic nuclear weapons, okay? So that is what is going on the Iranian front. Nasrallah, who is the leader of Hezbollah, made another interview today, another statement, I should say, a public statement. Nobody really pays attention to them anymore because I think there was a time when we all thought they were going to actually be consequential, but it's usually just a lot of rhetoric. Anyways, he said something interesting today, however, and he said that Lebanon's readiness to confront the Israeli threats are real and they are 100% ready for war with Israel. And he also warned against the use of smartphones and social media. Okay? Now, why did he do this? Well, of course, this is what they're using to track movements. So the fact that he got that specific is quite telling, and maybe that is something that not everybody has picked up on. And the reason why these wars are going to continue to ramp up is because the Senate today passed a $95 billion global defense spending bill, which essentially global defense, because it's not any defense of the American borders. Now, of course, this still has to pass the House, and many people are saying that this is going to be blocked by Michael Johnson, either by filibuster or by, I think he has some sort of power to reject it even being tabled in the House. Regardless, what they can do is what's called a discharge petition, which is going to bypass leadership to hold a vote on the legislation. And according to Joe Biden, there's enough interest in the House to get this bill passed through. Now, we can presume that the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, the Homeland Security chief, that was a bit of a trade-off here, that they were trying to give the Republicans a bit of a Pyrrhic victory of sorts so that they can get this thing done, get this thing pushed through. And a lot of people are saying, well, $95 billion, it's a lot of money to be committing to world wars right now when our cities are crumbling, infrastructure is crumbling, everybody's poor, nobody can afford to eat. And that is true. But there's a much bigger picture that I must reiterate every once in a while so people understand what's really going on in the world. The US is the global reserve currency. The only way you maintain that status, and the only way you maintain what I call the golden credit card, which is essentially the ability to print as much money as you want because you know everybody around the world is hungry for US dollars. The only way you have that perk is if you maintain a militaristic presence around the world and you contain the sphere of influence of your adversaries, like Russia. We might not think that Russia gaining a foothold in Ukraine is going to change our domestic situation over here at all. However, it will. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that, and I'm no fan of this idea, okay? You guys know that I'm not pro-war. I'm very dovish when it comes to war, but I'm just laying out a reality that everybody needs to understand. Because either you have to choose between US dollar collapse or World War III. Now, any sane person is going to say, okay, we're going to take the US dollar collapse, the British pound collapsed, and Britain is still doing okay. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's a bad example, but they're still there, okay? It didn't go Mad Max and anarchy. Yes, we would have this economic downturn. There would be a protracted depressionary period, but it wouldn't involve nuclear weapons. However, that can't be said for Europe. So we have a choice right now. The United States has a prerogative in order to basically suppress all other countries who might emerge as competitors to the global reserve currency, be they the euro, be they the ruble, or the yuan, or whatever BRICS puts together. And yes, I said euro. The United States has a vested interest, and I'm not talking about the people like me and you. I'm talking about what Gerald Celente calls the bigs. I like that, the bigs, the elites, the power brokers. They have a vested interest in suppressing the euro and effectively bankrupting Europe and getting Europe to go to war with Russia. And this is what people don't understand. This is why there's a rub there with Trump saying, well, we're not going to come to your aid. I already explained why that's a bunch of nonsense anyways, because the criteria that he lays out, all the countries who are most liable to go to war with Russia, as we're going to talk about in just a moment, are the ones that are already paying their fair share, okay? Who gives a shit if Spain and France don't contribute to NATO? In the grand scheme of things, Russia is not directly targeting them right now. A lot of people mistook what I said the other day, thinking that Russia couldn't touch France. Russia could completely wipe France and Spain off the map. Don't get me wrong about that, but they don't want to, okay? They can barely make it through Ukraine right now. So they still got to contend with Poland and Germany and all these other countries that are in the way of these countries that aren't paying their fair share. But understand that if we leave NATO, then yeah, Europe and Russia are going to effectively destroy themselves, that is actually, surprisingly, not necessarily a bad deal for the United States, for the US dollar anyways, because it's going to allow us to keep the money printer going for just a little bit longer. Now, in the end, however, and this is why I think you probably have military strategists having these conversations with the people who dictate fiscal policy in the United States. They must, because if I know this, they know this, okay? They know, and this is why, if they would just be upfront with the American people and just say, hey, if we don't keep this war going and if we don't contain Russia and China's sphere of influence, the US dollar is going to collapse. If they would just come out and say that, maybe people would actually understand. But you see, they speak in these very circuitous ways where they don't just cut to the chase and they don't just say what they mean. I mean, Mitch McConnell came out and he basically said that yesterday, but the only way you're going to really understand what he was saying, is if you already kind of know what I'm telling you right now. So this is the thing. It seems like a big investment, $95 billion. And again, I don't support the idea. I'm just saying, when it comes to collapsing a $30 trillion economy, $100 billion is chump change. And the people in charge, they know it, okay? And that's why they're always throwing out these comments like, hey, it's cheap. Ukrainians are dying for us. Let's do that now. And when they say that the American soldiers are going to be fighting against the Russians if the Ukrainians don't, they absolutely mean that. And they might not even mean fighting the Russians directly. We are going to be fighting some proxy war somewhere to, again, try to contain that sphere of influence and make sure that we can retain the global golden credit card. So long as we are a bastion of economic stability, the cleanest shirt in a dirty laundry pile, then we will be able and permitted to continue with the money printing process, okay? It's all about oil too, and I'm going to explain that in just a moment. Now, let me actually explain that right now, because we're going to talk about Russia. Yes, Russia is on fire once again as well. But people need to understand something. And I made a comment on Peter Schiff. I love Peter Schiff. We're going to have him back on the channel soon, once again. But sometimes they always underestimate oil when it comes to explaining inflation. I mean, look at the correlational pattern between oil and inflation. Now, it's not exactly a one-to-one causal relationship. Sometimes oil rises before inflation. Sometimes inflation rises before oil. And you can explain that by saying that people are front-running the market. They know that, the price of oil is going to be higher, therefore inflation goes up and vice versa. But just understanding that everything revolves around oil, and also understanding that something very important happened right around here in 2014. What happened right around there? Well, I explained this yesterday. This is what happened, okay? Let me just see if I can, let me see if I can control edit the regions and countries. So let's take off Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Norway, Iraq, and let's just keep Russia and the United States on there, okay? So take a look at this. We don't have data for Russia, at least this website doesn't, prior to, the Cold War, effectively. But take a look at what happened right around here. Now, Russia was crushing it, okay, in terms of oil production. This is when, U.S. oil, the conventional crude, peaked right around here and it plummeted. Then something happened, the shale boom happened, okay, and then production just skyrocketed, okay. Now, this is during the time when we're fighting all of these Middle Eastern wars, trying to get all that oil because our domestic production is going down. Now, look at what happens right around here. All of a sudden, the focus shifts because guess what? Right around this time, this was 2008 that this happens. Suddenly, remember what happened in 2008, the stuff with Georgia Russia starts getting a bit more powerful. They start making some moves. Now, slowly and surely, Russia is the top exporter of oil in the world, even more than Saudi Arabia at this time, I do believe. In fact, let's just get Saudi Arabia up here really quickly, okay? Let's just get them up here really quickly. Okay. Okay, so they were kind of neck and neck with the Saudis. Regardless, neither here nor there, okay? Now, you can see something around here. This is where they're all clustered. This is the point when the United States surpassed the Russians in terms of being a net exporter. And really around this time, this is when the economy started really roaring, okay? This is when they just went gangbusters on fracking. Trump got into office and they took the gloves off and they just started drilling everywhere, okay? So look at 2014. What happened in 2014? Right at the time when Russia, Saudi Arabia, and the United States were all neck and neck in terms of oil production. Well, I think the USA got a little brazen at this point. Now, we all know what color revolutions are. If you don't, I would encourage you to go look it up. The CIA has a tendency of either trying to destroy a country economically, not just the CIA, but just intelligence agencies in general. If they can't do that, they'll foment a coup. And if they can't do that, they'll do a proxy war. And last but not least, perhaps they'll do a full-blown war against that society. So United States gets very ballsy, and it's when we've reached our peak almost that we say, okay, it is time to empower the Ukrainians to start ratcheting up their attacks on the Donbass. And of course, this is when Biden meets with Putin that one last time, and it's determined that they're not going to find peace. And then you could say that, okay, Russia did invade. Were they provoked really is the question when it boils down to it. So we knew that this was inevitable. The question is, how long can we sustain this peak? That is the question. Because right when that starts to tick downwards, the game is over. Unless we can take out Maduro and take Venezuela's oil. And that is, and I'm not saying I want this, I'm speaking facetiously about it, but that's what they're going to do. In fact, Maduro today had indicated that they had uncovered numerous attempts by the CIA who are collaborating with the right-wing groups in that country to try to take them out because, of course, Venezuela has the largest supply of oil on Earth, likely more than Saudi Arabia. And I say that because a lot of people don't believe the Saudis when they say that they have as much energy as they do. So this is a big problem. So as long as we can keep that oil pumping out and flooding the global market, because remember, as the global petrodollar, as the dollar is pegged to oil, we cannot fix the price of our oil domestically. This is why people say with the SPR, we got to hoard it all. And, why is the government sending oil to China? Well, for one, China makes all our stuff. Still, I regret to inform you, it's just a reality. There's a lot of hard economic realities that a lot of selfish people don't fully comprehend. Like a lot of people, even after I explain this, they're still not going to understand why they need to send tax dollars overseas. And I get it. It's hard to do. But when you understand how the whole system and how, the premium that we pay for that is so that we don't have to pay our debts ever. But we do have to pay them when the oil starts to plummet and when we start losing the wars and we start losing and our sphere of influence shrinks. So yes, if Russia gets more powerful and they emerge from all of this and they're able to eat up even more territory and diminish the Eurozone sphere of influence, and worse for the United States is if they're actually able to start selling their oil and gas to Europe again, and Europe isn't locked into our LNG, liquid natural gas racket, then the game is really over, okay? And I'm not just saying over like apocalypse over, but it could be because, of course, if you let Russia go too far in this war with Europe, then they do become an existential threat to the United States. They become too powerful at that point because all of the land that the Russians conquer also has material value. In fact, the Donbass is a wealth of resources. It's a wealth of farmland, 25% of which is now contaminated by landmines and all other manner of chemical agent that's been inundated with since the heavily bombarding of that territory for the last 2 years. However, this is just something to keep in mind, okay? So this is why the United States have to play this balancing act. They don't want to start wars they can't win per se, but I do believe when they talk about exiting the Middle East, the only way they're going to exit the Middle East is if they have a plan with Venezuela, because it's all about oil. Anyways, I hope that was somewhat useful to understanding. This was a massive explosion that happened in Russia yesterday. Looks like some kind of natural gas facility. Then we have another act of sabotage here. This is where they make MiG-31 parts. It was on fire in the city of Moscow. Then we have another apartment building. I believe this is not in the big cities, but closer to the border regions of Ukraine. So that's what's going on that front, okay? Now, this is how you know shit is getting real. We got to talk about Russia issuing a warrant for the Prime Minister of Estonia. This is the type of jurisprudence that precedes a hot war. And if you can read this headline here, Baltic countries will create a defense line on the border with Russia following the example of the Russian Surovikin line. The last I heard, the Baltic states were not at war with Russia. So why are they building an actual defensive line, complete with these anti-tank barricades and bunkers? I believe this is going to be like a 600 bunker fortified defensive line along the border with Russia. Russian law enforcement agencies have informed TASS, which is Russia's primary news agency, kind of like their BBC. So yeah, it's full of propaganda, just like the BBC and the CBC and the NBC. They have filed a case against the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kallas, and Peter Kopp. I believe that might be one of the ministers within that country, for the destruction and damage of monuments to Soviet soldiers. So they've been destroying these monuments. Now, this is just the first domino to fall, I think. Because, of course, now Russia has incentive to effectively declare war or try to seek some sort of extradition, which will never happen. But, this is just one more thing that is happening. Of course, there are Russians living in the Baltic states who are being denied rights. There's all kind of trade barriers being imposed. What's going on with Finland? The border's closed. The new prime minister who just got elected said that they're not going to open the border until the war in Ukraine stops, which that ain't going to stop for a long time. So this is the Cold War. I mean, this is it, guys. They're setting up a defensive line, okay? Right now, the Brits are moving into Germany to simulate a Russian invasion. You got Steadfast Defender going on, which a lot of people think is just going to be a launching point for a NATO incursion into that country, a uniformed incursion into the country, and Article 5, Article Schmive. We're going to talk about Article 5 and why it's probably one of the most overhyped things in history, especially in recent geopolitical history, because not a lot of people truly understand what it means. So we're going to do a dedicated video on Article 5. We're going to bring on an expert to help us fully comprehend what the actual results of that are going to be. So this defensive line, they're trying to emulate the Surovikin line, which was the defensive line, of course, that the Ukrainians could not breach in their counteroffensive attempts. And it's going to be anti-mobile defensive structures that are implemented. They're going to be implementing digging bunkers. They're going to likely be militarizing this region because, recall, you're going to have 5,000 German troops entering that Baltic region as well. And for all we know, they're sending drones, or Ukraine is utilizing the Baltic Sea to send some of these drones to Russia and places like St. Petersburg. So that's a problem. And another problem is that Poland now wants nukes. Now, I talked about this a long time ago. Okay, if you want to know the news, if you want to know what's going to happen next year, if I say something is going to happen in 3 months, it's probably going to happen realistically in a year from now. To be brutally honest, that's the track record we've had at this point in time, whether it's attacks on critical infrastructure, the bombing of the Kakhovka Dam, the Crimean Bridge. It all happens. It just seems to take a little longer. However, we're getting down to crunch time. We're in a very critical period between now and the election, and quite frankly, anything can happen. Any day now, any moment, any minute. During the making of this video, shit can hit the fan. NATO member Poland should eventually get nuclear weapons as a security measure. A top Polish general has said, it's obvious. They got they have the most, American military equipment. They aspire to be one of the biggest militaries. They're now going to be on the front line. They're a fully fledged NATO member. They pretty much have all of the best American weapons. They're fast-tracking the delivery of F-35s as we speak. One of the biggest military exercises is taking place there. And if there are concessions that have to be made in Ukraine, you know for sure that they're going to put nuclear weapons in Poland. They're already in Turkey. They're already in the Netherlands, I believe. Or is it Belgium? There's maps I've shown on the channel before. They have them stored in the UK as well, and a few other countries throughout. And then, of course, France and the UK have their own nuclear weapons, in Israel as well. But the Poles, according to Brigadier General Jaroslaw Krasuski, has told Polish media outlet RMF that if Warsaw had nuclear weapons, it would deter possible aggression because those who possess nuclear capabilities have a high level of security. Now, I personally am not entirely convinced that the Ukrainians don't have nuclear weapons. Because think about it. They had one of the biggest nuclear facility in Europe prior to the invasion. They have all kinds of fissionable materials that they could make dirty bombs with. And remember, this is why Sergei Shoigu in late 2022 made all those calls to the other Secretary of Defenses in the NATO countries and said that Ukraine is getting ready to use a dirty bomb. We know it, and if they do it, then there's going to be hell to pay. And of course, that didn't happen. So I think it's very naive. If we're sitting here talking about whether or not Iran can have nuclear weapons, knowing what NATO has already given to Ukraine, in addition to that, knowing that they're helping them in this fight, we can presume that in the very least they have dirty bombs. And it's not a stretch to think that they have nuclear weapons, considering a lot of the people who worked on the Soviet-era programs are fighting on behalf of Ukraine. This is why Vladimir Putin says it's a civil war and not an actual war. In fact, the new commander of the Ukrainian military forces, people are circulating videos of him marching in a Soviet parade. Okay, all these guys went to school with each other. He speaks Russian. Half his family still lives in Russia. It's a very complicated state of affairs. So this no doubt is a civil war from the Russian perspective, but when you factor in the partisan stuff that's going on there and all of the commingling of Ukrainians and Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine, yeah, it really does start to look like that, okay? But this is the civil war that precedes the World War. Now, they're not the only ones who want nukes. The EU also wants its own nukes. Deputy Chairman of the European Parliament, Barley, allowed the creation of a EU nuclear weapons program against the background, and this is very interesting, against the background of statements by U.S. presidential contender Donald Trump. Europe may think about its own nuclear weapons program. So what would that really look like? Because that wouldn't be NATO, that would be the EU. Now, is this a threat to the United States? Because, of course, the U.S. is the one who wants to maintain dominion. They now have access to all of Finland's military bases. And basically, whenever you become a NATO member state, the U.S. has the ability, they got to sign some agreements afterwards, but the U.S. has access to most of the major military bases in Europe. So is this some sort of veiled threat that they're levying here? It's hard to say. She recalled that now the nuclear deterrence of Europe's opponents give us the prerogative of the NATO alliance. Given the recent statements of Donald Trump, we can no longer count on Donald Trump to come to our aid if he gets elected. Again, I think that's complete and utter bullshit. because, as I've already thoroughly expressed, there is very little risk that Russia is going to leapfrog over what they call the intermarium states, which are essentially, let's see if I have an image of that here. So the purple and the blue states are the intermarium states. These are all the people. Blue is paying over 3%, or sorry, purple is paying 3% of their GDP. Blue is 2% or more of their GDP. So these are all the nations that are paying their part. What a surprise that they all border Russia and Ukraine and Belarus. Isn't that interesting? So yeah, these are the ones that NATO is still going to back up, that the Americans are still going to back up. So, you know, Putin's not going to start firing missiles into Sweden or Italy, or, I mean, come on. Let's get real. I mean, that's just propaganda. That's when, you know, two propagandas cancel each other out. It's kind of nice when that happens, actually. Apparently, the CEO of Lockheed Martin went to Poland recently, and they're going to fast-track those F-35 deliveries, okay? And if you think that there's going to be a ceasefire, think again. The United States has declined Russians' ceasefire talks. Vladimir Putin had proposed a ceasefire in Ukraine to freeze the war, and that was rejected by the U.S. after contacts between mediators. So, and some people will say, well, you know, Putin is saying that he wants a ceasefire. However, they're not really making any concessions, and they're continuing to push ahead. And I don't really understand how those back-channel negotiations work entirely. But it appears as though, you know, one way to look at this is that the U.S. is now, with this last infusion of $95 billion, it really is a bit of a sunk cost fallacy, where we're just, like we've done in the past, now we're just trapped and victims of mission creep, where we've invested so much money into this process that were we to pull out now, the situation would be much, much worse. However, if we continue and we make it even worse, and then we pull out, it's going to be even worse. So I guess we're just going to have to see. But either way, the United States is not the only one struggling, because Russia is also raising their draft age. Okay, so Russia is proposing a draft legislation to raise the age of military contract personnel, including those who were recruited before June of 2023, to age 65 and 70 for officers. This would substantially raise the current age limit of 51. So you're going to see a lot of old faces in the military, just like you've been seeing in Ukraine for some time now. Got some interesting OSINT from a contact in Belgium who says that the farmers' protests there are leading to shortages. They're already starting to associate the farmers who are protesting with Russian propagandists. You couldn't see that one coming. Increased military recruitment ads in that country. Increased military activity. And apparently they're encouraging people quite actively to get their jodium tablets, which are basically potassium iodide tablets, complete with nuclear instructions: go inside, stay inside, wait for orders. Basically, they're telling all the hardcore Western countries the same shit, okay? Get inside, stay inside, and just kiss your ass goodbye. Because every other country on earth has a contingency plan for their population when the shit hits the fan, which is part of the reason why Article 5 is nonsense and nuclear war is a lot more winnable than a lot of people realize. But war isn't as winnable as a lot of people realize. We're going to be releasing some videos this weekend that are going to blow your mind with respect to the extent of subterranean fortifications in our adversarial countries. They've been digging like you would not believe. The Russians have erected a railway car defensive line, okay? 30 kilometers, 2,100 railroad cars. This sounds like something out of the movie Snowpiercer. Unbroken fortification follows along a railway track originating from the station in Olenivka and extending to Volnovka, employing around 2,100 diverse wagon types. Of course, you've probably seen the videos of these. There's guns on them, air defense, and yes, You'd be right to say that aren't these things just big targets for drone attacks? Absolutely. I guess the Russians would make the argument, though, that the train tracks are already targets and that you would still have to take out the trains in a fairly broad area if you wanted to do some sort of blitzkrieg penetrating maneuver. So it's an interesting strategy. We'll see if it's compatible with modern warfare. Zelensky is heading to Europe to do his usual round of begging for money. Now, usually when Zelensky goes to Europe, things seem to happen, okay? In fact, I've done videos in the past where, according to insiders, they claim that he actually vacated the country because they were actually worried that the security situation was that dire. And if we know that Ukraine is running out of stuff right now and the Russians are pressing in Avdiivka, then there's a possibility that Zelensky is actually concerned for his life and worried about the collapse of the military there as a whole. Maybe this Sirsky guy that they put in there, maybe there's some sort of deal with the Russians that, maybe he's going to be the turncoat. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I don't think that's going to happen, to be brutally honest. I think they're going to continue with their sending thousands of drones into Moscow. That's their plan. Okay, but I think they need him out of the country for now, just in case. Usually when he leaves, big shit goes down. Now, there was another rumor circulating, and this is just a rumor. Okay, I want to make this abundantly clear. There's a video going around that claims that Emmanuel Macron was supposed to go to Kiev to visit Zelensky, but they declined at the last minute because they caught wind that there was, get a load of this, and again, this is just a rumor, I don't believe it, I haven't really done a lot of fact checking on it, I just thought it was worth, putting out there, because it's an interesting idea. Even if that isn't true, it might explain why there's a reluctance of Western leaders to go there anymore. They claim that a great way to bait NATO into a conflict would be to assassinate a high-level NATO politician. Emmanuel Macron would be a great target. If you take out Macron in Ukraine, I mean, that's instant NATO commitment into the fight. So perhaps, just perhaps, Macron caught wind of this, or it's just because Zelensky was going to go to France anyways and they decided to meet there instead. I think that's the more parsimonious explanation, but you just never know at this point in time, because if you really wanted to bring NATO into the fight, wouldn't that be the ideal set of circumstances? I mean, aside launching a missile into that country or conducting an act of sabotage in a country and blaming it on the Russians, I mean, the best thing would be the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, right? Okay, so something to think about. Don't be surprised if somebody gets capped. All right. And according to Politico, NATO may collapse. I think that's probably just, Trump propaganda. Apparently, there's been a 4,344% increase of Chinese migrants at the U.S. border. Now, again, not being xenophobic here, but we have to understand that the U.S. and China are not necessarily friendly with one another right now. And if there were 20,000 Chinese nationals that came through the border this year compared to 450 in 2021, I think that's a data point worthy of reflection. So something to keep in mind, if there are sleeper cells, and again, we're not doing the whole putting the Chinese and Japanese in internment camps like happened in World War II. That's not what I'm encouraging here. I'm just saying that the time is going to come where that's probably what's going to happen. And that is how they're going to get everybody fighting with one another. Because of course, now you got somebody that looks like everybody. I mean, let's face it, you got your bases covered. You got the people who look European, the Russian. You got the people who look like they're from the Middle East or like Arabian or Persian. You got the people who look like they're from Asia, China. So all of our adversaries, they basically encompass the whole gamut of the global south, as it's called including many African countries. So basically, everybody is going to be suspect. And that's convenient if you're trying to bring in totalitarianism, of course. So it's kind of dual purpose if you're the elite. Now, in terms of the election, I don't know what to think about the election. All I know that the fact that Biden is still up there is really, it's inexplicable right now. It's I just don't know what to make of it, how he's still there. On the one hand, I'm thinking, okay, are they trying to throw the game? Let's just spitball a bit for a second here. This video is long enough. Whoever's still here is a lover of the channel anyway, so you guys are willing to tolerate me for another 10 minutes or so. Let's just spitball here. Okay, so perhaps they like having a guy in there who just signs documents and blithers random unintelligible babble every now and again. And as long as they can keep him propped up Manchurian style, they're okay, taking that. Maybe they're just going to try to milk this dead cow for what it's worth until the bitter end, knowing that Trump winning the election is a foregone conclusion, and they're going to have to concede. They're just going to try to milk every drop of milk out of that dead cow, which is Joe Biden. I'm sorry if I offended anybody by calling Biden a dead cow, but probably not the best metaphor. But I think you catch my drift. So that's one possible explanation. Another is that they do have a backup plan. It just hasn't been activated yet. Now, there's a couple things that could happen. Some people say, well, they're going to postpone the election. That's very rare. And I think at this point in time, postponing the election, would be very suspicious to a lot of people. Like, I'm talking about if there was a major incident, if there was some sort of domestic upheaval of sorts, or if there was a major terrorist attack or another war that flared up. Usually under those conditions, historically, the president is going to be reelected anyways, okay? So that they would have to cancel the election, I don't necessarily think so. Now, we all know cognitively, even the mainstream media is starting to call it out now because they're starting to get worried. People who actually buy into this left-right bullshit dialectic, they're actually starting to get worried that they're not going to have their candidates reelected. So they're starting to talk about Harris, Newsom, Michelle Obama. You could have some X factor come out of left field for all we know at this point in time. Regardless, do not underestimate the power of the media to basically put lipstick on a pig, okay? And I'm not calling Kamala Harris a pig by any stretch of the imaginations. I would not disrespect any politician by insulting the way they look or anything like that. But what I'm trying to say is that all it takes to turn an enemy into a villain into a hero is a little bit of time, a lot of money, and a disaster, okay? And let's face it, in Western society, we're brainwashed, where the majority of people are willing to pay like $10,000 to go get a Super Bowl ticket. We're fickle, we're capricious, we are easily subdued by a big crisis. All it takes is a big crisis, and before you know it, whoever you hated one day people are going to start to say, well, I really don't like her thoughts on this, but I like the way she handled that. Now, for some people, that's always going to be a no-go zone. But if Harris, as was hinted in the recent Easter egg she dropped about a week ago, where she said that she's ready to run and ready to replace Biden if need be, if she were to take office, okay, a lot of people are going to be like, oh God, it's the end of the world. But do not underestimate her capability to do the right things to win over the public. And I know this seems like a long shot, and it probably is. I'm just saying this is one of the many ways that this can go, okay? They can do that. They can do Michelle Obama. They could do Newsom. They could do a lot of things. But if that were to happen, do not underestimate their capabilities to convince people that it's a good idea. And, whatever happens, maybe they're just trying to throw the election because they know 2025 and beyond is going to be an absolute shit show, and they don't want that associated with the Democratic Party, and they want to hand it off to Trump so he can basically finish things off. That's possible too. I mean, as you can see by this diagram behind me, the good old Hegelian dialectic, this is interesting. I've always been trying to think about this because you always have these people who are either pro-Ukraine or pro-Israel, and some are neither of those things. And so this kind of explains it here. So you have the majority of people who are center-left to moderate left are fairly pro-Ukraine, right? Then you have those hardline kind of communistic types. In fact, World Socialist website is a great example of this. They're actually staunch supporters of Russia, or they sympathize with the Russian cause. Conversely, you have those near-centrist conservatives who also, and this is why they voted on the Senate package, who also understand that, and still, reminiscent of the McCarthyist days and the anti-communistic sentiment, are still here. And I would actually say that if you go far enough to the right, the ultra-nationalist, fascistic types, that, let's face it, the Nazi types, of course, they're over here, and they would also be very pro-Ukrainian for many reasons. Now, if we go down to Israel, it's a bit more complicated. We've always kind of had that bit of the centrist left support Israel. It's always usually been a bipartisan thing, and this never used to be the case, okay? This started becoming the case probably around 20 years ago, and I would say this has been moving towards the center, almost edging the left out of the Israeli cause entirely, and I think if they do this Rafah thing the wrong way, they're going to lose all support, except for the deep state left, who will always support Israel. And then, of course, you have the right, who, for religious reasons, those religious affinities they have with the region and wanting to bring about the Messiah so the end of the world can come and the destruction of the temple and blah, 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 blah. Well, it's a much larger swath. But you also have those people on the far, far right who kind of align with these guys up here, who might be those anti-Semitic types, who might not like Israel for those reasons. And some of them might do it surreptitiously and do it in dog whistling, if you will. So it's complicated, but I thought it was an interesting thing I'd like to share with you guys anyways. Here's an interesting one. This is a Russian headline. Great risk. The Russian Security Council did not rule out the start of an accidental nuclear war due to Joe Biden's health problems. I guess I should leave you on that note. The world began to fear that the actions of the American president could lead to an accidental nuclear war. Fortunately, the people who are handling Joe Biden are the ones that are in charge. Let's face it. Let's be honest with ourselves. That's what's happening. How about I leave you with a really bad joke? This is a real ad, okay? Navy and Army set aside 1.2 million euros for incentives to refer a friend scheme. So imagine the affiliate commissions of the future, in that you're going to get paid to refer, to send people to their deaths. I hope that the Onion or the Babylon Bee runs with that and pays me royalties for that skit. They got about 200 payments pending. Could you imagine all of these NAFO shills who come on here day after day, and I cannot stand these people. I don't know what kind of dweeb watches a lot of these channels and actually thinks it's a good idea what these people are saying. Most of them they're people I would not trust around my children. Yeah, NAFO, I'm talking to you. I would not trust you around my children, okay? But could you imagine the affiliate links in these guys' descriptions? They get a sign-up bonus if people go and subscribe to this or join up to fight the Russians. That's what it's coming to, and you're going to get a sign-up bonus. And so you're going to get, like a 10% of whatever that is. That's what's coming, guys, okay? So military-industrial complex, fascism to the max. I think we turned over every stone here that I wanted to turn over. This was we did a recent video where we talked about asymmetrical warfare. So this is what could be happening in these shipping containers across, there's thousands, if not 100,000 cargo ships at sea on any given day, and they could all be warehousing military equipment. And you don't need a big fancy warship for these things. Of course, they're mostly offensive in nature, I would presume. But there it is. We got to get the Container Guy. My buddy over at the Container Guy, who we've done a lot of collabs with, maybe he can build us something like this. Actually, okay, now I'm definitely on a list, aren't I? But I'm going to show him this just for kicks. I just realized that. Yeah, so this is the war we're about to fight. People have no idea. No idea. If you think that fighting Hamas was going to be difficult, wait till you get Hamas on the open seas and you have to fight vast, extensive subterranean networks that have been that are very sophisticated. It's going to be next to impossible. So I hope you're ready for it. And the reason why I think we're so ill prepared is because they realize that they're going to use biological warfare, they're going to use cyber warfare, and they're going to use EMPs. That's going to be like 90% of what they're going to be able to do. Then they're going to use a few nukes, probably for good measure. We're going to normalize the use of tactical nuclear weapons at some point. But they're still going to run into the problem of, the people and the resistance, which is going to be basically an insurmountable problem. So they're going to have to ultimately win the hearts and minds of the people. If you can't do that, it's futile. Thanks for watching, guys. And don't forget, the best way to support this channel is right here, CanadianPreparedness.com. Keep it in the family. Thanks a lot.